When a person dies, roughly 21 grams of their total body mass simply disappears. The scientists of this world discover that those 21 grams are the weight of the spiritual element within a body. In other words, the weight of the soul. Corpse engineers are able to bring back the dead by infusing pseudo-spiritual elements back into the body. This is what our main character, John Watson, is currently doing, although rather illegally. John is a medical student researching corpse technology, with the hopes of eventually becoming a fully fledged corpse engineer. While waiting for the spiritual serum to take effect, he notes how Dr. Victor Frankenstein was the first person to ever reanimate a corpse, which he later named The One. Not only was One brought back to life, but he could even speak and act as a human with desires and impulses. This was something that no one was able to replicate since, and with Dr. Frankenstein's research notes having disappeared along with The One, countless engineers have tried and failed to achieve similar results. At most, the corpses reanimated could be considered imitations of One, being neither capable of speech nor self-thought. Bitterly, John thinks that if he can find a way to put a 21-gram soul back into a body, then the people he's lost will come back and everything will return to normal. Once the procedure is complete, John approaches the body he's just reanimated to see it open its eyes and stand up. He quickly gives it some commands to ensure the procedure was successful, after which he hands the corpse a pen, ordering it to note down every word and action, with the hope of that helping in creating his own soul. We find out the corpse's name is Friday, John's friend who tragically died and for whom he risked everything to resurrect and hopefully bring back to life. In the beginning, people were afraid and despised resurrecting the dead. However, that quickly changed when they found out that corpses could be used to fight in wars and no new lives would need to be lost. Soon, corpse technology became the driving factor for the development and prosperity of every country's economy. The technology used to reanimate the dead is called necroware, and it's incredibly illegal for someone unauthorized to possess it. Unfortunately, John is in possession of this exact necroware, and the next day, after waking up in a daze, he's shocked to see a man with an eye patch looking through his research notes, while another points a gun his way, preventing him from moving. The men, now revealed as the British Secret Service, question his motives and inform him of his serious crime. However, John defiantly responds that he never tried to hide his actions, expecting them to find him eventually. The man notes how the Queen isn't ignorant and would never let a talented individual like him rot away in a dungeon. Finally, he reveals himself as M and tells John that it's time for him to serve his country as a subject of the British Empire. Much later now in Bombay, John along with Friday reach a bar after their long journey. Meanwhile, they catch a glimpse of a military parade, along with a visit by a former American president. He also spots an incredibly beautiful blonde woman in the crowd. But before long, two huge explosions go off, instantly creating mass chaos. As John is stunned and can't believe his eyes, a corpse dashes his way and pulls a pin on its neck. Thankfully, before he explodes, another man appears and smacks the corpse away, saving John. He then prompts him to follow as they run to escape with a carriage. The bearded man informs John that those corpses are corpse bombs made by the Russians, used to infiltrate and carry out attacks undetected. While riding the carriage, they realize they're being chased by more enemies with the aim of preventing them from completing their mission. But thankfully, with Friday's and the man's help, they manage to drive away and lose their attackers. With things having calmed down, John asks if the man is Captain Frederick Burnaby, the bodyguard and watchdog that was assigned to them. But Frederick just jokes that he's their babysitter, while the two joke and make some small talk. Friday diligently notes down their interaction. After reaching the train station and embarking, Frederick hands John his new forged identity and a note along with an image of their target, Alexei Karamazov, the Russian corpse engineer who is regarded as the Russian equivalent of Dr. Frankenstein, or at least the closest person to reach him. In a flashback, we see M briefing John on his mission and giving him a quick rundown of the man. Supposedly, Alexei intends to establish a whole new kingdom, with only corpses as the population. And he is also supposedly in possession of Dr. Frankenstein's research notes. John's task is to investigate this so-called corpse kingdom, and recover those legendary research notes, which would theoretically give a person the power to perfectly reanimate a corpse. M also informs John that the Russians are after Alexei, so conflict is inevitable. But they can't allow either party to use that research and dominate the world. Upon reaching their destination, they meet a new person who will assist them on their mission, Nikolai Krasotkin, a Russian spy that will act as their guide. After a quick introduction, Nikolai informs John that Alexei developed new technology from Frankenstein's notes and asks him if he's curious to see it. While preparing for the journey, John asks why Nikolai's helping them, since the Russians are after the notes as well. However, Nikolai informs him that his mission is to retrieve Alexei, while they can get to keep the notes. That is the only reason they agreed to this joint operation. The next day, after reaching their destination, the Khyber Pass, the group comes across a large-scale bloody corpse battle while scaling the sides of the pass unseen, and John witnesses for the first time the damage and agony that corpse technology can bring. Once they reach a plateau, they get ambushed by an army of undead, along with some strange new corpses, able to move swiftly, predict attacks, and even dodge bullets. While sniping these assassin corpses, Nikolai informs them that these are the new corpse technology that Alexei had developed for the Russians before disappearing. As the group barely manages to defend and survive the undead onslaught, a carriage comes out of nowhere, along with the blonde woman John had previously seen, carrying a flamethrower. And with it, she quickly obliterates the undead army surrounding them, after which she mysteriously rides away. Frederick rushes John and the others to quickly scale down the cliff and escape, but John asks if they can retrieve one of these assassin corpses for him to inspect. Later at night, after successfully escaping the ambush, John and Friday carry out a dissection on one of those new corpse models they managed to receive. Once John gives the order to power the installer of the body, he's shocked to find out that the corpse is seemingly trying to speak. However, before he can gain any information from it, the installer overcharges the corpse's brain and explodes, killing it in the process. Displeased by today's experiment, John lights a cigarette and proceeds to contemplate on what he witnessed today. When out of nowhere, the blonde woman that had saved them previously appears and introduces herself as Hadali, the private secretary of President Ulysses S. Grant, with the man in question not far away greeting John from his armoured carriage. Hadali briefly asks John if he's managed to find the soul from the corpse he'd just inspected, and although he can't say for certain, John explains that thought precedes speech and that undead tried speaking. However, he tells Hadali that it's just his hypothesis and can't prove anything. The next morning, the group start their long trek in the Afghanistan countryside, coming across many villages and meeting new people. Eventually, they reach the snow-capped mountains, and after asking for directions from the villagers living there, they embark on a rowboat down the river, which leads our heroes to encounter a group of unusual undead. Among these undead, they find a man who Nikolai introduces as Alyosha, who surprisingly welcomes John, saying he's been waiting for him. Once inside the secret mountain base, Alyosha questions John's motive for wanting the research notes as they enjoy a luxurious meal. John resolutely states that he wants to advance corpse technology and replicate the reanimation of the One. After briefly discussing the improved corpse soldiers they witnessed, John asks Alyosha for the location of the notes, but the man responds by telling him to destroy Frankenstein's research when he finds it. The next day, John walks into a room shocked to see Alyosha performing the resurrection procedure on a very much alive Nikolai, as Alyosha tells John to look at this new corpse technology he's wanted so much. Nikolai can only scream out in agony as the procedure takes effect, turning him into a semi-alive corpse. Horrified by what he's seen, John is outraged by Alyosha's actions, but the man reveals that he's done the same to the man he'd taken from Khyber Pass, since he was also semi-alive. Alyosha then asks if John's satisfied with what he's seen and if he finally understands why he wants to destroy Frankenstein's research. Still, John states how the technology is incomplete, and instead of trying to improve it, Alyosha gave up when it mattered most. Incredibly, Alyosha then kneels in front of John, apologizing to Nikolai, and in the next moment, the semi-alive Nikolai stabs him in the neck with the same tool that transformed him into a corpse. After falling onto John, with his dying breath, he tells John that the research notes are now in Japan. However, he pleads with him to remember his request and destroy them once he finds them. His corpse butler then pulls the lever, and Alyosha is then also transformed into a semi-alive corpse. A year later now in Japan, while watching a sumo bout, John is approached by a man holding a katana, who states that he's been sent by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the request of a friend of Nikolai, and introduces himself as Seigo Yamazawa, and is affiliated with the Imperial Japanese Army. While riding in his carriage, Seigo explains that the note's location is currently unknown. After Alexei entrusted them to Russia's previous minister, he was in possession of them until he made contact with a corpse technology corporation known as Osato Chemicals, after which nothing else is known. Although Seigo notes that this corporation is trying to develop new corpse models in an attempt to win support and influence from the current government. Later that day, at night, after having successfully infiltrated a heavily guarded facility of Osato Chemicals, John, along with Seigo, Frederick and Friday, realize that someone else managed to infiltrate the building before them and neutralize all of the guards, along with a British agent, making the group realize that a third party is at play here. Inside the lab of the facility, the group finds multiple vats with corpses infused with deadly pathogens in an attempt to create biological weapons. As they continue deeper into the lab, the group enters a room, triggering a mechanism that locks them inside and awakens a pair of huge samurai battle corpses. What's more, they seem to be a level above the assassin corpses they previously encountered. Not wasting any time, Frederick instantly engages one of the undead samurai, while the other dashes to John, but is stopped by Seigo. A quick but epic exchange ensues, and although Seigo manages to defeat the samurai, he is stabbed in the stomach by his katana. But like a badass, he pulls the sword out and then dashes to assist Frederick into holding the samurai back, while prompting John to run ahead and find the research notes and destroy them. Although John is injured in the process, he and Friday proceed inside and manage to find Frankenstein's notes displayed in a complex machine. Upon finding what he's been looking for all this time, John remembers the promise he made to Friday when he was still alive and decides to analyze the research notes instead of destroying them. While Frederick and Seigo try their best to defend against the horde of infected undead, the system power goes out, killing all of the corpses attached to it and momentarily disabling every undead, but also giving Friday an immense electrical shock, which seemingly makes him gain awareness, but also struggle in pain. Frederick and Seigo arrive as well, and while Seigo tries to keep the undead from entering, Frederick approaches the notes intending to destroy them. However, John stops him, thinking that Friday's soul returning is somehow linked to the notes. Frederick pushes John aside, stating that the world would be a better place without them. But before he manages to destroy them, a huge explosion takes place, destroying everything around them and knocking everyone unconscious or dead. Surprisingly, an elderly man enters the room and grabs the notes, asking John why he's willing to go to such lengths to obtain Frankenstein's technology. Taking his glasses off, John recognizes him as the One, the legendary first corpse to be reanimated over 100 years ago. Then, with a tap of his walking stick, he somehow commands the rest of the corpses to follow and leave with him. As John loses consciousness, he apologizes to Friday for not being able to keep his promise. Meanwhile, we see a flashback, where Friday realizes that he's on the verge of death, and so, to keep helping John with the research they were both carrying out, he tells John to retrieve his body once he dies and use it for the experiment. Friday even states that he'll give a signal if he senses his soul. However, having failed to do so, John is now haunted by his nightmares, as he sees Friday melting away after he sacrificed himself for their research. John wakes up later on the ship Richmond, heading to America, surprised to see Hadley beside his bed taking care of him. President Grant then recruits him and Frederick to help them in taking down the One. Grant believes that the One holds a grudge against humanity for creating him and is seeking revenge. During the journey, John focuses on helping Friday, who has become aggressive and is now chained up. Upon reaching San Francisco, the One uses the research notes to transmit a signal that causes corpses, including the crew of the USS Richmond, to attack humans. In their attempt to escape, Hadali discloses her identity as an automaton or robot capable of controlling corpses using sound waves. She desires a soul of her own. Tragically, Grant dies in an explosion caused by a corpse. Hadali guides John and Friday to a sewer entrance, leading them to her safe house. At this point, she and Frederick briefly part ways. However, Friday, that seems to still be feral, tries to kill John initially, but surprisingly recognizes him and gives John the signal they agreed on by tapping his nose with his pen. Friday then attempts to shoot his brains out, but John is faster and manages to put him to sleep by injecting him with a sedative. Finally, at Hadley's safe house, John successfully repairs Friday, rendering him immune to the signal emitted by Frankenstein's notes. Meanwhile, M manages to find and capture the One, while also retrieving the notes, with which he intends to turn all humans into corpses to end all wars. He then imprisons the One in the Tower of London, where using Frankenstein's notes and with the information in the One's brain, M uses Charles Babbage and Frankenstein's brain, which had been preserved all this time to analyze the One's mind. This analysis generates a stronger signal, causing every corpse that comes into contact with it to attack humans. John, Hadali, Friday and Frederick utilize a submarine, the USS Nautilus, to break through the Traitor's Gate. While Frederick distracts the corpse guards, the others make their way to confront M. Hadali manages to subdue M and employs her abilities to suppress the One. Friday takes control of Charles Babbage to halt the signal. Nonetheless, M shoots Hadley before being shot by John. The One is freed and kills M, overpowering Hadley and managing to take control of Friday. The One discloses his intention to create the bride promised by Frankenstein and merge the primitive minds of all the corpses into a single human mind. Using the research notes, Charles Babbage and Frankenstein's brain, the One summons the soul and mind of his bride and transfers them into Hadali. Simultaneously, he transfers his own soul and mind into Friday. However, Frederick damages Charles Babbage, compelling the One to return to his original body. With Friday's assistance, John manages to permanently trap the One within Frankenstein's noted for good, defeating him and causing the tower to collapse. Before parting ways, John acknowledges that Hadley is developing her own soul, encouraging him not to give up on truly resurrecting Friday. Returning to the house where he first revived his friend John and Friday, combine Alexi's research with the surviving pages of Frankenstein's notes to conduct an undisclosed upgrade on Friday's corpse. 4 years later, John is seen fleeing with his new companion, Sherlock Holmes, while Frederick and Hadali, now going by Irene Adler after changing her name, observe while enjoying some tea from across the street. Incredibly, it seems that Friday has also been fully resurrected, as we see him looking at John through a spyglass from a rooftop. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.